remind everybody to turn off or mute your cell phones. And I'd also like to invite you to find out more about our society. Those of you who aren't members yet, you can find information on the side of the wall there. I'd also like to invite you to share some cookies from us at the end of the program, which are on the table there. You're welcome to please check out our website, RBHistory.org, to find out more about the work that we do to preserve Rancho Bernardo's history. One of the interesting things you'll find there is we're in the process of digitizing historic photos and documents. There are many already up there, and our volunteers are working every week to add more. And you can find that by going onto the website, and you might see some photos that might bring back some memories for you, and you can click on the photo to get a larger shot as well. So I guess we can do that. And last of all, I'll mention our next program, which will be March the 9th, which will feature Gail Laughlin and Linda McAvoy, who are two principal investigators at the University of California, San Diego's study on healthy aging, the Rancho Bernardo study of healthy aging, which is a local study that has been going on for decades, and it is continuing. And they will be here to talk about the origins of that study and its progress as it is ongoing. So be sure to mark that on your calendars. Today's speaker, we're very happy to have Mr. Ross Rizzo. His family has provided a home for our historical society for decades, and we appreciated that, and we appreciated their interest in history. And I'm very happy to have him come here today to fill us in on the winery's history. Mr. Rizzo has a degree in economics from Cal State San Marcos. He is a former president of the County Vintners Association, and he's a very articulate and interesting speaker, as I've found in observing other talks. So I'm very happy now to welcome Ross Rizzo Jr.
Yay.
Hi, everybody. Hi. This is so nice to have a full house in here. This is great. I give this talk a lot about the history of Bernardo Winery and the history of Southern California winemaking. It's actually a super interesting topic, and it's super easy for me to explain it to you guys because it's very short, which is great. Good Sicilian talk, very short, not complicated. Like Vince said, who everybody thinks we're related, by the way, because his last name is Rossi, and my first name is Rossi. My father's name was Ross Sr., and the way they differentiated between him and me is they added an I on his name. When I was a kid, some people would come into the tasting room and say, "Oh, is Rossi here?" And all the wine stewards would point at me. Well, it depended. If that person was over the age of like 40, they actually meant my father. It was his nickname when he was a kid, Rossi. So a lot of his older friends knew him as Rossi as well. So that kind of stuck, the whole Rossi thing, which is the I. So everybody thought that we were related or the same person at some point. My grandfather's name is Vincent as well. So, thank you guys. Welcome. You are actually sitting in the old garage of the winery. This building was the original garage. It actually just had like an open front. I actually brought some cool pictures today on the PowerPoint of this building. And then over time it changed into this awesome museum by way of some retail shops that my dad put in and things like that. So, press the button. So, winemaking, of course, is an 11,000-year-old process. They found in the Caucasus evidence of humans cultivating wine grapes and making wine in amphoras or clay pots about 11,000 to 12,000 years ago. You can imagine the kind of discovery when you picked a bunch of grapes and left them in a bucket for a while, and then someone tasted them and said, "Man, these taste horrible. Wow, everybody's more attractive." Then you get population boom, and then you end up in California in the 1700s. So the missions were the starting point for wine grape growing in California. Anywhere a mission went, sacramental wine had to go. The art of winemaking was very intertwined into the church. And the Spanish missionaries landed in Mexico in the 1500s, and they brought the mission grape. It's actually called Criolla. If you go to Spain now, you can actually get a bottle of Criolla, C-R-I-O-L-L-A. That is the genetic predecessor of what we call today the mission grape. It was brought to Mexico by the Spanish, and they planted it all throughout Mexico. It is the first Vinus vinifera, or that specific strain of wine grape. So Vinus vinifera is all the wine grape strains that we make wine. Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, all the ones that we all know today and we buy at Trader Joe's or here. That is kind of the genetic predecessor to quite a few of them. The Franciscan missions were started, of course, up through California, and in 1769 the first mission grapes were planted at Mission San Diego de Alcala. They planted probably about 20 to 30 acres of it, enough to give people wine grapes to make at home, because the settlers here were still making wine grapes. The neophytes would take care of it. The conscripted natives would take care of the vineyards. And the mission grape was really hardy. It was perfect for California. Perfect for the weather that we had then. Was a lot more wet. It would grow really naturally in our soil. They found that the Spanish climate, where the mission grape was grown in the beginning, was very similar to the San Diego climate. So they started planting these mission grapes all up California. That was actually one of the first varietals that were grown here as well. Now, of course, sacramental, but also, because the natives weren't super adept at alcohol yet, they thought that was kind of a fun little party that the Franciscans brought, and so that was another reason why you would join the church in that sense. So this winery was founded in 1889. So between the mission starting in 1889, this was really the Old West. I mean, very much the Old West. I'm standing next to this mud wagon. This was pretty advanced even for the time between, the mission starting in like 1850. But a lot of these areas around here were so fertile, people would homestead on them, and they would plant citrus, they would plant grapes, they would plant olives, and it was a really very agrarian society. Even up to my father's era, where he said, when he was 16 or 17 years old, there was only a few farms around here. On Sundays, he would take a couple cases of gallon jugs of wine, and he would go to different farms and trade for whatever those farms were growing. I mean, even that kind of culture grew into, the 1950s, 40s and 50s. They would go to the Fentons down in San Pasqual, and they would get eggs. We'd go over to the Dailies, of course, and get beef. They'd trade wine for beef. They'd go down to the Williams down in Poway and get citrus and avocados and things like that. So it's very similar back in the day. These vineyards were grown all over San Diego County. I mean, everywhere. All the way up through like San Gabriel and Los Angeles and Anaheim is a very famous story of the Anaheim vineyards. And then into Rancho Cucamonga as well, which was said to have the largest vineyard on earth, contiguous vineyard on earth at one point. So it was all very similar style of growing. They would plant grapevines. They would head prune them, or kind of bush prune them. There was no wires, no trellising like how we kind of see them now, or how you see the vineyards are growing here now. No trellising. The plants were like at almost 15 feet apart from each other, so you could get tractors through. Even once the vines had grown, there'd be a lot of leaf. You could still get tractors through, so you could till the ground, keep the weeds down, and so you could go out there at night and eradicate the rabbits. It's like my dad's favorite thing around. So the winery was founded in 1889 by 5 Sicilian partners who kind of noticed that there was a new need for a commercial wine enterprise. A lot of people were buying grapes. Between 1850 and 1889, there was a lot of Sicilian and Portuguese immigrants that came to San Diego, for the fishing industry that was just really starting then. And they wanted to make wine at home. They did that in the old country. They would get grapes in their local vineyards. They would make wine in their basement. There's no basements here, but they would make wine in their basement anyway. They found that all these people were kind of moving into a little bit more of an urban setting where, winemaking at home might not necessarily be as easy, or they didn't have enough money to buy a big enough place to, make wine for themselves. So they needed a place to, get wine. And of course, Los Angeles was getting really big by then. Escondido in 1885 became a city, and that was, that had a population that was substantial enough for these guys to notice that, a commercial wine enterprise was important. And you know, that you know, you guys drove into here, and you can see kind of like all these surrounding mountains that Poway is on, like Old Winery Estates and like Hounds Ranch and where like Stone Ridge is and everything. This is a little bit of a valley that opens up into a really predominant sea breeze. And for wine grape growing, that terroir is really nice. It's really nice. Of course, it's changed because, you know, the tremendous amount of urban sprawl that's happened in Rancho Bernardo and all that has changed the climate here a little bit. And when this was all just chaparral and shrub brush, you got a tremendous amount more of this unadulterated sea breeze. Now, you know, with the asphalt and everything else out there, it does change it a lot. There's been a lot of studies from UC Davis, where I got a winemaker credential from, that says that the more urban sprawl climbs up to your vineyards, the faster the vineyards actually get affected by that. So the farther away from civilization your vineyard is, typically the better the grapes are, if the climate is right. So they kind of focused on small production from 1889 to up until Prohibition. It was not like a huge production. It was probably about 20 or 30,000 cases of gallon jugs predominantly. So we were so far up 25 miles north of downtown San Diego, we were far enough away where you would not want to take this every Sunday and come listen to live music, right? It was not like a thing to like come here a lot and leave, buy a couple bottles of wine. You would commit. You would buy a couple cases of gallon jugs. There are loading docks. If you go to the restaurant where the pizza oven is right now, actually behind that is a loading dock. And then right in front of where the old coffee shop is, V's, right across from the tasting room, that's another loading dock. Those loading docks were not for bringing grapes in. They were for rolling barrels out, full barrels out. There's a lot of hand trucks that are around the property, kind of strewn, that are full barrel hand trucks. They're built to pick up a full barrel, 59 gallons. It's like 560 pounds or something of full wine that you would take back down to San Diego or to Los Angeles or to Escondido, and then you would drink off of that or have one giant party. I don't know. So this was Escondido actually. So I have letterhead from back in the, actually not until recently actually, that Bernardo Winery was officially in Escondido. And the nice thing about that is that anytime Escondido does any sort of wine-centric events, we're always invited, which is very nice of them to do. So this is a topographic map. This is Escondido right here. It's all kind of considered to be, of course, San Diego County, but this was Escondido. This is from 1893, this topographic map. And that little tiny dot right there, I put an arrow right there, that's actually they would put these little square dots because that's where a home was. That's where a homestead was. So that's where the winery was back in the day. That's where we are right now. So even in 1893, this topographic, when they were surveying this whole land, they put Bernardo Winery on there. So it was a really interesting transition, of course. You know, in California, the Prohibition started in 1920, and you know was a big hit. But because we were out in the middle of nowhere, San Diego wasn't exactly like, there was not a whole lot of agents here. It was kind of like a little bit more quiet, you know. So my grandfather, I'll get to my grandfather a lot more in the coming slides, but my grandfather bought this winery from the founders, Lanza and Licata. So you can see it on the bottom label right here. This is one of the few bottles that I have left. This is a 1917 bottle of port. It's in my office. But it has, you can see on this side over here, it has a World War I ration sticker, a ration stamp, or a price fixing stamp, I guess they call it. But essentially that made sure that, you know, you couldn't, I mean, it was, you were rationed for alcohol, but also the prices were fixed because, of course, everybody, you know, everything was rationed, so you wanted more of everything, you would pay a little bit more price. That was the fixed price. 20 cents for that gallon jug in 1917. Yeah, sure. $250,000 sounds good. I'll take it. So, between Prohibition starting and Prohibition ending, a lot of wineries went out of business. A lot of wineries went out of business. It was said that there were about 50 wineries in San Diego County before Prohibition started, and after Prohibition, there was only 2 or 3. It was us. Ferraro Winery in Escondido that was just bought by a really nice gentleman that owns a winery up north, but it's called Forgotten Barrel now. And then Maggetto Winery, which was located very close to where the Palomar Hospital is in Escondido, the new one. So this is Schedule 5, that's continued from somewhere, I have no idea. With Bernardo Winery highlighted here, we did 23,000 gallons in 1934. And you can even see like Behringer did 31,000. You know, and there's some really famous names on here. Aztec Brewing, that's still a brewery that's still open. You know, that was on there in 1934, so kind of interesting. So San Diego, you know, it was a very new city. It was not full of a tremendous amount of people. You can see on the right that historical population table right there. In 1890, when the Bernardo Winery was founded, close to founded, we only had 16,000 people in San Diego. So that's not a whole lot of people to sell wine to, you know. So where was all this wine going? Well, you can notice that in 1930 there was 150,000. Well, that changed drastically. That was tremendous. And all those people were drinking, because after Prohibition, why not? You know? Like I was saying, a lot of the vineyards were for home winemaking, and were also for, before Prohibition specifically, were for home winemaking, but also, you know, they would take the fresh fruit, they would make raisins as well. There was a tremendous amount of ship traffic coming into San Diego and then going north, you know, after the gold rush for sure, during and after the gold rush. So a lot of fresh fruit was going north, a lot of raisins were going north. A lot of fresh fruit and raisins were actually going south around the Cape, because that was a tremendously long journey, and this was the kind of like the last stop before like Mexico and things like that. Of course, they would stop along the way, but this would be great to get tremendous amount of fresh fruit before you left for the long journey. San Diego and wine before Prohibition too was very specifically a winery and a still. You would have a still at large wineries. This winery had a still, you know, making brandy. So they would take the wine, run it through the still, evaporate off the alcohol, catch all that alcohol, and then you would have 93% alcohol brandy, which is like jet fuel. That, of course, would be added back to wine that you made maybe the next week or the next year after you've aged the brandy for a little bit to make fortified wines. Now, fortified wines, this is a very, very important thing with San Diego wine and California wine in general up until about the mid-1950s. Fortified wine was drank 2 or 3 to 1 to fine wine after World War II. Before World War II, basically 90% of the wine that was consumed in California was fortified wine. That's where that term wino came from, right? In France, you know, we have cognac, we have Armagnac, we have the very expensive brandies. We have port from Portugal, we've got Marsala. You know, those are all kind of like higher end fortified wines. California became famous, unfortunately, for the kind of the more cheap, inexpensive stuff. Stuff that you would get, you know, in the bottles like Mad Dog and whatever else, Night Train, scary. So that kind of is the culture that was born out for these fortified wines. Now, of course, there was some really phenomenal stuff. Bernardo Winery made that port, you know, in 1917. We continued to make port all the way through the history of Bernardo Winery, and we still make port today that's really good. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number one is we were very far away from wineries. So you would live down in San Diego, you would live in Escondido, you wouldn't really make the trek to Bernardo Winery very often. You didn't have a refrigerator. The actual bottles were not necessarily airtight completely. And fine wines that are not fortified, or basically fine wines that are under 18.5%, are susceptible to a couple of different bacteria, one of which is acetobacter that turns wine into vinegar, of course. Well, at above 18.5% alcohol, those bacteria do not grow in wine. The wine actually gets better if you let it out in the air to a certain degree. And so you would keep the wines all between 18.5 to 22% alcohol. That kept them really nice and fruity, very flavorful, a little bit higher alcohol. You could keep them a little tiny bit sweet without them re-fermenting. You could keep them a little bit sweet because it would kind of mask a little bit of that sharp alcohol. And so that was kind of the modus operandi with making fortified wines. And that's what this winery was predominantly known for. We made a lot of fortified wine, a tremendous amount. Out of those 23,000 gallons in 1934, I bet you that more than 75% of that was fortified wine. A lot of the winemaking techniques back then too didn't allow to make fine wines in large bulk amounts. If you guys take a trip later after we're done here to our old winery, our old cellar in there, you can see these 11,000 gallon redwood tanks. They're huge. They are not airtight at all. They are just a giant storage vessel. My dad was famed for cutting one in half and making a swimming pool out of it. So, you know, they're not airtight at all, which means they're perfect for fortified wine. You can fill that thing up halfway with fortified wine. 59-gallon barrels, the smaller barrels that we're kind of used to seeing at wineries and here as well, they're built to be completely airtight. They're filled up all the way to the top. The wood expands, not letting any oxygen in at a macro level, but they're letting oxygen in a micro level, which evolves the wine into something that we all like to drink, you know? But throughout this whole history from 1850, you know, from 1865 when Buena Vista Winery was founded in California, all the way up until the modern age, wineries in California retooled from that fortified wine production to fine wine production. That 750 milliliter bottle with a Portuguese or Spanish cork in it that we all like to pop, or a screw top or whatever. They evolved, they changed from fortified to fine wine. Now some wineries did that early on. Inglenook was very famous for that. They changed